Hello, everyone. I'm Gavin Stephenson from Accenture. I lead our applied intelligence business in the UK and Ireland, which is the part of Accenture that really focuses on everything to do with AI, data, and how to scale that within organizations. I'm joined today with some of the representatives from MasterCard, BJ, and Ahmed. I'll let them introduce themselves in a second. And really, we're here to have a bit of a fireside chat, which is quite ironic given the heat at the moment. But we just wanted to talk about some of the processes and strategies around how you scale AI in an organization. But importantly, the link between business strategy and AI strategies and the convergence of those two things as well. So we'll cover a bit of that in terms of the topic. But let me just hand over to BJ and Ahmed for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Gavin. Hi, guys. Good afternoon. I'm BJ. I'm heading AI ML engineering product function in MasterCard. And in that capacity, I'm responsible for commercializing AI. So my journey starts from POC onwards. And it works out on a different ecosystem, like maybe on the network, maybe the offline, maybe it's API system, maybe it's near real-time APM system. So that's what my remit looks like in the MasterCard. And I have my team all across the globe. Majorly, it's Dublin-based. There are 50 members in US, in India. And we are primarily towards the ML engineering. And I want to make a sort of a distinction over here that we are not towards the ML ops. We are more towards the ML engineering. Yeah, thanks, Gavin.
Yeah, hey, everyone. It's great to be here. So my name is Ahmed Mirshawi. I'm Director of AI and Machine Learning in MasterCard Cyber and Intelligence. And with BJ, my team is mainly providing the skill set needed to bridge the gap between proof of concepts and production-ready machine learning systems. So mainly addressing, a whole variety of problems around operationalization of machine learning systems.
Great. Well, look, let me kick off with a couple of, observations, right? Two things to say is, first of all, and I'm sure many of you will resonate with this, the topic of AI has become a board-level conversation, okay? It is a C-suite discussion that is being had, and that's observation number one. Observation number two is, as part of that, I think you'll recognize that the role of the CDAO and AI executives in organizations has also fundamentally changed, right? If you think about 3-5 years ago, CDAOs and AI executives were, custodians of the data platforms and focusing on data foundations, and that's super, super important. But actually now, AI executives are part of driving P&L outcomes. And it's about the measurement framework has moved much, much more towards, new revenue streams, growth, AI opportunities that optimize supply chains, optimize costs, and all those sorts of things, and really drive a different culture within the organization as well. Now, I know from a MasterCard perspective, BJ, we've been talking about MasterCard being sort of data-driven by design. Do you want to just maybe give us a couple of examples of how the AI strategy and the business strategy within MasterCard have really started to converge?
Yeah, Gavin, in MasterCard, let's take up this question in two tracks. One is the privacy by design, as you said, more around the data. Mm-hmm. And the second one is the AI business strategy.
Yeah.
Right? So if you look at this, MasterCard is in a payment industry and domain, right? Things are changing fast in this. We are ourselves in the innovation age.
Yes.
And especially post-COVID, there are so many consumers on the digital network space compared to the pre-COVID phases. Mm. Now we are getting around 1 billion plus transactions a day on the network. We are talking about 20,000 transactions a second.
Right.
Yeah, so things have changed a lot in the last 24 months. Now, if I look at this, then MasterCard has got this data by privacy fundamental thing in place. That means right from the day one, once we start looking at the AI use case, we have to ensure that there's a data by privacy in principle, in practice is there. And since data is part of our corporate strategy, also it's a fundamental enabler for our 2022 objective. It's one of the biggest objectives we are looking towards it. Now, if you look at this data privacy fundamentals in MasterCard, we have very robust security and privacy by practice fundamentals in place. Right? We have set up the accountability. In a sense, we are not just collecting a data for the sake of collection. We are making sure that there's a purpose over here, and we are informing users why we are collecting the data. Third is innovation. Like, are we just collecting data for a typical, let's say, analytics products, or are we talking about new modern age innovation around it, right? For example, all the AI products around it, right? Then we have the social impacts. Are we doing positively? Are we positively impacting the society, or is just having another exercise, right? Then we have a transparency and control. Let's say if there is a question on the collection of the data, if there's a request for data deletion, we have a mechanism in place which we can follow to delete the data, right, if there's such a request. So yes, data by privacy by design around the data is there on the day one itself, right? Now, if you look at the business strategy around AI, I would say it's roughly driven by 3 E's. One is how we can enable the stakeholders, right? How we can embed the AI in the fabrics of the MasterCard. When we are saying the fabrics, we are talking about the core transaction system, right? And how we can empower the different business units, functions in the MasterCard so that if they build any products, how they can leverage the AI in those products and services, right? And the fourth one is very important, where we are building our internal capabilities, be it a computer as a service, be it a modern data pipeline, be it moral governance framework, etc. So we are looking at all these 4 possible ways to justify and to keep up our pace in this modern AI world. Yeah.
That's great. And I mean, back to my point around, the pervasive of AI strategies within organizations. Accenture did some research recently, and we interviewed 1,600 C-suite executives, and actually 75% of them said that AI is already an integral part of the business strategy, right? So actually, I'm sure if I look around this room, I'll see sort of 75% of people nodding their head saying, absolutely, it is embedded within our organization, and 25% are probably saying, well, geez, we need to look at this quickly and start getting on the ball with it. But I think that's kind of really led to, as I said, and as you've described from a MasterCard perspective, a very different way of thinking about the implementation of AI. So it's no longer experimental and, POCs to identify value. It's moved to a much mature stage now within many companies. And as we start to look at that next step, I guess the question of operationalization of AI becomes super important. And I don't know, Ahmed, maybe I'll bring you in at this point. What kind of approaches in MasterCard do you use in terms of operationalizing AI?
Yeah, sure, Gavin. So I think operationalization of AI is the mainstream of today's startups. And the main reason behind it is that it takes really a village to bridge the gap between the proof of concept, the lab demo, into a production-ready deployment. And sometimes there's a lot of excitement about people's ability to train an AI model and get good results, which is totally justified. At the end of the day, training the model sits at the core of any AI system. But if you look at the full life cycle of a typical machine learning system, it includes and it involves more than training a model. So you can think of it as more of an end-to-end capability that starts with collecting enough data, making sure that high-quality data consistently flows into training a model. And here we are not talking about training a simple model using a notebook. This is more of a training hundreds of replicas of the same algorithm using different hyperparameter sets, and then choosing the best model to be promoted to production. And then we have the deployment and monitoring. And again, deployment is not just simply having a microservice in production. It involves a lot more than that. So it includes how many replicas do I need to have this kind of real-time or near real-time inference. You have a lot of constraints from the hosting environment itself, that it needs to have the inference within a specific timing. So you need to have this kind of information there. And also monitoring for different data drafts. So you have the data draft as a concept draft, and how you can loop this back into the trainer to be able to train a new model and push it back to production. And finally, of course, auditing for performance and fairness issues. So having this kind of end-to-end pipeline and having a cross-functional team that can build this end-to-end capability empowers a lot more people to build, deploy, and maintain machine learning systems. And if we look at the paper by Algorithmia, the 2020 paper about the state of machine learning in the enterprise, we will see that more than 70% of the enterprises successfully deploy a machine learning system into production from the ideation phase within 3 months. So having this capability is a must nowadays.
Yeah, no, you said two things that I think were really important just to pull out there. The first one was actually it's not all about the models, and you know, Bijay and I were also joking about this a bit earlier on today to say, you know, there's a lot of focus sometimes on the model and the algorithm itself, but actually that's probably the 10% of the problem. Now it's a big part of the problem, but it's the 10% of the problem. As you described there, the actual end-to-end pipeline through to production and post-production is super, super important. So it becomes an ML engineering and ML ops discipline as much as one of the kind of purest data science. That's a really important point. And then the other thing that you mentioned there, which is super important, is this idea of cross-functional teams, right? Because I think the disciplines around AI are starting to converge, and actually convergence is a theme that I'm going to bring up a number of times. You know, the convergence of AI and data into the business strategy, and the thought provoke that says, well, actually, at what point does AI become the business strategy, right? You know, another thought provoke here is you know, part of what you're talking about around the end-to-end is almost in some respects AI becomes a data problem, you know, in terms of how you feed and how you train and how you learn models. But I wanted to pull out the cross-functional teaming thing because I think that's a key success factor when it comes to implementation of AI successfully and driving value. And there's probably, you know, there's loads of success factors that we could call out. I mean, I think when we were thinking about the topic, we settled on 3 that were really important. One of them was cross-functional teaming. The other one was a relentless focus on value and outcomes, have an outcome-driven approach rather than a sort of input-driven approach, if that kind of makes sense. And then the third one was a real focus on embedding AI and making that adoptable by consumers and business users. So it's more about the end-to-end. Bijay, just on the point on value and prioritization of value, because this is where I think many struggle, because it's, you know, you can define a whole set of use cases, you know, go after loads of different opportunities. There'll be value pockets everywhere. In MasterCard, how do you go about approaching, prioritizing, and really getting that focus on outcomes and value?
Yeah, so I'll pick up one very good example. In 2018 or 19 approx, we had nearly 100 use cases, which was tested inside the lab.
Yeah, yeah.
There was AI working in the lab.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And when we tried to reach out to the business and said, hey, how many of this AI product or services you actually needed? The question was, what is the cost? Right? What is the cost? How much I'm saving in terms of, let's say, operating this whole automation, or let's say new revenue stream, et cetera, et cetera. So I found like 3-4 years back, there was always a discussion between this AI versus cost, right? And then there was like 100 use cases, which needs to be operationalized.
Yeah.
And each of these use cases were mostly around the complex machine learning system or advanced deep learning kind of a world, right? So we always had the challenge how we can pick up out of this, let's say 10 examples, right? Which are super important from all the perspective, be it's a business, be it's a corporate strategy. Like, for example, some of those were very important from a brand awareness side, right? Are we keeping secure our brand? It's not about just revenue or process automation. Are we catching up some of those malpractices in the network as well? And then are we rolling out new experiences in the market? So we, at the executive level, we picked out few of such parameter on based upon that, we started picking up the use cases. When basically we started mapping the use cases into one of these levers, right?
Yeah.
Then the next step over there was, okay, can we have an architecture template around it? So that we know like, okay, this use case can go through this, let's say, Hadoop-based ecosystem, right? For example, offline AI scoring, let's say, right? You don't need to have everything running inside the Kubernetes infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
It can run on the legacy data warehouse, what I mean to say. The second one was, can we have, okay, so if there's a use case which needs to be on the real time, and real time you're talking about 30, 40 milliseconds. So definitely that means a different architecture pattern.
Yep.
Yeah, you need to think from a latency standpoint, you need to think. So we come up with the architecture template as well, right? And when we say architecture template, it covered everything. What is the infrastructure? What is the machine learning framework? What is the data pipeline? What is the governance framework? Because some of the reasons where regulations were very different, right? So we have to consider those aspects as well before picking up the use case for operationalization, right?
Yeah.
For example, some of the use cases could work in the, let's say, Russia, but those use cases are not so open in Ukraine, for example. I'm just quoting it. So we picked up those kind of onboarding checklist, and then we had the business value proposition along with this. And that's how we decided, okay, out of this 100 use cases, these are the 4 or 5 use cases which can go along this route, and this is our operational expenses, etc., and how quickly we can deliver in the production, right?
Yeah.
So yes, we have gone through the journey, I would say, in the last 3-4 years. We have matured into it. Now we know that, okay, this use case is a mandated use case which needs to go in the market for regulatory reasons. And this is the architecture pattern template around it. So we know the cost, we know what it takes to bring it to the production, so that, you know, we are not getting into that, okay, where things couldn't scale. Or let's say things couldn't work on 10,000 requests per second kind of a throughput, right? For us, it's not about putting up AI in a system. For us, it's more about, can this AI fit into this billions of network processing infrastructure?
Yeah, yeah. So it's a deploy and embed problem as much as
Yeah, very much MasterCard network centric.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. And on the you know, one of the other success factors, Ahmed, you mentioned the cross-functional teaming. Do you want to just bring that to life? Because I know that as part of your team and the work that you drive at MasterCard, it's a much more broader team than kind of just the ML centric nature. Just bring that to life for us a bit from your point of view.
Yeah, sure. So from what I have seen, a lot of companies hire great data scientists and machine learning engineers for building the core machine learning systems, and it works great for them. But if we see there is not enough data scientists and machine learning engineers out there for all of the AI companies that we have. And I have seen more and more companies have good results with educating their own domain experts, the people who know already about the business, about some data science and AI tools. And I think the main reason this kind of approach work is that for building any AI system, you need to have this kind of interdisciplinary knowledge of the technical skills as well as the business application. So this is mainly driving great ideas based on their business knowledge. And I believe one more thing that is often underappreciated is to get executives a little bit of non-technical AI knowledge. And I think this drives better and successful collaboration between executives and AI, technical AI teams responsible for building the project. Sadly, some of the executives nowadays think that you can magically transform your business overnight with AI. So magically possible, but overnight is impossible. So definitely very important.
Yeah, and that kind of leads to the last point that we were pulling out, which is around making sure you've got clear adoption of the AI products and services that are that are coming from lab to deployment to scaling, and actually having, business teams, design teams, architecture teams, ML engineers, all as part of that, cross-disciplinary, structure really helps drive that adoption at the other end, because actually you brought others as part of the journey as well. So there were some of the a few of the success factors that we pulled out. There are clearly many more. I guess there's the other side of that, which is, I guess, some of the more consistent challenges that we see when it comes to AI implementation and AI strategy execution. And I know that, there are many, many blockers and challenges along the way. Any particular learnings, I guess, you'd want to pull out from some of the challenges that you've seen as you've gone along the journey at MasterCard? I mean, it's an open question, and any thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe I can.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, I think at least 2 years back, we were trying to operationalize a product for our brand monitoring. Right? It's a MasterCard name is BRAM, basically Business Risk Assessment, something.
Got it.
It's our brand program, whereby we protect our network. Right? We try to adhere with the regulatories of that particular country, right? Because regulatories are different across the countries, right? And we also have regulations that certain transactions we won't let it happen because of our brand conscious reasons, right? For example, drug trafficking, right? Illegal gambling, and there are many other, I would say. Now, when we had established this team, which started working on this proof of concept, things was working I remember we had tested for the Ukraine when there was like 20 million records a month was, coming as a part of the data prep, right? So that concept of distributed training, and we were using some LSTM model, long-term, short-term memory model, right? So we were using that technique and it was working for Ukraine. But when the distributed, and we were very good with the distributed training, we had the competency that, okay, how this will work on Hadoop kind of ecosystem. But then when we moved towards bigger market, let's say US, where we were dealing with 50, 60 million transactions a month fitting into this scheme, we saw that the distributed training approach was not working. Right? And all along this journey, what we had realized that we missed the understanding of the technical debt, right? So what has happened in the phase one in the lab, somebody has coined a nice feature engineering, which has worked on a certain scale, but that distributed feature engineering had a challenge on this, let's say, Hadoop cluster, because it couldn't synchronize the data or shuffle the data between the nodes. So something which worked on the small scale couldn't work on the bigger scale, and hence we had the problem of scalability.
Yep.
So as I said, when we started this journey, we had this kind of a challenges, right? We had no idea, okay, how we can scale it up. So that's where our standardization of the architecture template came into play, right? Okay,
yes.
If we have to scale this way from this market to this market, from this data volume to this data volume, or if we have to change our feature engineering from, let's say, more silo-based to more distributed way, or let's say if the data science technique is A versus B, right? What should be our approach, right? So I remember very correctly in this program, we were stuck for 3-4 months to change that feature engineering, which was creating a bottleneck for us because it was no way able to distribute itself. So learning from that, we standardize ourselves and we are much better with technical debt, number one, right? And also we want to ensure that whether that particular data science technique which somebody has picked up, right? Because that person is fancying around that deep learning kind of a thing, whether that really fits into this business system or not, whether that's really solving a problem or not, or it's just about putting AI. So we bring into those kind of levers to actually evaluate what should be the right strategy now, right?
Right, yeah.
So of course we have moved ahead from those kind of challenges.
Right, got it. And I mean, I think that's kind of super relevant, and actually what, from an Accenture perspective, we see it at many clients are those types of challenging when it challenges, not just when it comes to scaling, but when it comes to scaling in different geographies and different markets in different contexts. And I think there's probably a couple of other ones that I would also open out on in terms of some common challenges and sort of in operationalizing and executing the strategy. I think the biggest one that I see many organizations face is funny enough, it ends up being a funding challenges because a lot of these journeys don't span just 1 year or 6 months. They're multi-year transformational journeys across organizations. And while the strategy spans multi-years, you get this conflict between what the strategy wants to execute over time and where the funding envelope sits for any one particular year. And it's a very operational challenge, but I'm already seeing nods around the room as to something that kind of really sits as a bit of a challenge when it comes to that kind of journey. And really the learning there is going back to what we were talking about on the value point is, making sure that while you can identify the value overall, you've actually got some short-term value points that you can identify early in the journey and deliver on. They give you proof and confidence points with the wider stakeholder group, but really they also help when it comes to that multi-year journey, because the funding's going to span multiple years, but you've got to be able to prove value quickly in the short term to basically keep stakeholders happy. And frankly, stakeholders also change, which is the other challenge, right? Is that your business owner today and your business sponsor today is never your business sponsor tomorrow, because it always flips. Something the rug gets pulled out. But if the story can maintain about how you're driving value, how you're creating, and disrupting, frankly, some of the processes, some of the business operations that are happening today, making them more lean, making them more efficient, driving new products and services, and you're demonstrating that as you go, that's kind of one of the key kind of challenges and success factors. We kind of see a lot of at clients. And then probably the final one I'll land on, which is I think a bit of a culmination of a few of the things that we've talked about, which is the kind of talent agenda. Again, it's a difficult one because even by evidence by the number of people that are at this conference today, right? The topic and the domain around AI, ML, and data has exploded, completely exploded. And with that has come a talent explosion, but talent who've got choices about where they want to go, what they want to do. And I think, and BJ, we were talking a bit about this, it's the move from being talented in one particular discipline to being multidisciplined and multi-talented, moving towards full stack engineering and those types of skills, which are really, really becoming the kind of new emergent skill and capability that organizations seek. But really trying to identify and find that talent can sometimes be a real problem. And therefore, the training and upskilling agenda becomes critical as part of how you kind of address some of those points. So they were kind of the two things on top of your point there that I've certainly seen myself, and we see a lot when we're talking to clients at Accenture. But let's kind of move us on, I guess, to the final thought, for want of a better word, final thought in terms of, I guess, closing the conversation, which is a bit of a look ahead, right? And to say, almost a question of, maybe Ahmed, you might want to go for this, but as you look ahead next year, next 18 months, next 2 years, what are you excited about in terms of some of the up and coming things, either in MasterCard or in the market at large?
Yeah. So I believe the fact is that we have a dedicated AI summit or a dedicated summit for AI tells us that AI and machine learning are moving into a position of tremendous power. And with this comes ethical responsibilities around privacy preserving and fairness. So I'm sure most of you are aware of the paper from Ian Goodfellow in Stanford, where they demonstrated that by only observing the final outcome of the machine learning model, you can infer some statistics about the training data. So the machine learning models itself can sometimes leak the training data, the personal training data that it learned from. So even though the paper is in 2016 paper, but there is still a lot to do around building privacy-preserving machine learning systems. And also more about fairness. And unlike privacy, fairness is all over the place. You can't really have a specific crisp definition of what fairness means. For example, for predictions, do you want to have the same false and negative rates and false positive rates for all groups or not? Is that fair or not? So there's a lot more to do around having a crisp definition for what it means for a machine learning model to be fair. So this is, I think, the main tracks where I believe we need to be improving on.
Yeah, and I think, two really important topics as we look forward. And I think, we could probably spend another hour or two just covering those points. I think probably a final thought from me is, I guess, back to the topic of convergence. I think that it's a really exciting time at the moment. And even as you walk around this summit, and some of the things that you see, what's coming together for me is, on the one hand, you've got AI now happening at scale, and it's real, okay? 3-4 years ago, it was experimental. Was it really real? Now, yes, I think it's really real. You combine that with actually a quantum shift, excuse the pun, in what's happening in the hardware world within computing, within quantum, and where that's going. And I encourage you to go visit the stands in the expo there, because there's some really cool stuff happening. You fast forward that 12 to 18 months, you look at what models and the parameterization of models and the explosion of that in terms of computations is happening right now. You put those two things together and you really get a new wave of disruption that's coming. On top of that, the third layer of convergence is the augmented reality, virtual reality world that we're seeing. So, it's like I bought a new car a couple of months ago. You get in it day one, turn it on, and there's a augmented reality thing on the screen in front of me telling me all sorts of stats about how I was driving. And I thought, should I be surprised about that? No, that's just normal. Everybody's got this kind of now. So the technology around this is becoming a lot more normal, a lot more mainstream. Again, fast forward augmented reality 18 months, combine that with what's happening in the VR world and the metaverse, the power of AI and the power of compute. I think we're looking at some really, really exciting things coming on the horizon, and a new generation of disruption. And I don't mean disruption in a bad way, but I think it's the opportunity that these things are going to provide, and really just different things and different ways of operating that we haven't yet even considered, which I think is going to drive and fuel the next wave of kind of industry revolution. So that's my point of view anyway in terms of what's to come.
Perfect.
Great, that's it. That's our fireside chat. I'm a bit hot, but I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.